Hi folks, I'm glad you could join me for today's little demonstration, and this is going to be a wee bit different, so it is. And I basically have a lot of students who often ask me what's the best paint to use when you're getting into watercolor. And I've tried probably nearly every brand that you can think of, very expensive to quite inexpensive and cheap. But just because paints are cheap doesn't mean the quality's not good. In fact, I've been quite surprised. So what I did was I took three different brands, and I'm not going to tell you what they are right away. And I'm going to do the same picture. Now I know there's a lot of variables here to take into account. The type of painting you're doing, the amount of pigment that you use in each painting. So it's not completely scientific at all, but just my impression of each type of paint. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start off this little picture. I'm going to try and replicate it with each palette, working maybe with the skies first on each of them, just to see what quality and how it all goes. So if you want to paint along or bear with me, and we'll see how we get on. What I'm going to do is I'm going to do a bit of an autumn scene. The reason being, you're going to get a good broad range of colours and values. But to keep this simple, I'm only going to use three colours out of each palette. I'm going to use a lemon yellow, I'm going to use like a cad red and an ultramarine. So I'm taking my first palette, I'm just talking you through what I'm doing here. And I'm mixing its lemon yellow with its cad red. And then it's just remembering you can go quite strong with these colours. So it's trying to match pigment for pigment. So I'll just add a bit more red into that. So I'm not actually going to show you the palette while I'm painting this, so that it's a fair enough test. So basically, it's all the techniques that I normally teach. And there's a good kind of discipline trying to do this with just three colours. And then I'm on the palette number 2. And now for palette number 3. And I know there's plenty of videos all over the internet talking about colour swatches and so on, and all good stuff. And when you're starting off, I certainly recommend that you kind of have a go at making a colour swatch just to see what your colours can actually do. But where do you go from there? So after you've made your colour swatches, you want to start actually trying to paint with them. So this is my third palette here. Okay, so what I'll do is I will give us a wee dry off just to speed up the process here. Okay, so what I'll do now is I'll go back to my first palette. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab a little bit of the blue in my palette. Just a very faint wash here with a wee hint of the red into it. I want this to look distant. I'm going to put a wee touch the green in that. So this is the water here we're doing. So I want to keep it nice and light, just to give out that sense of space. And okay, and I'm going to move on to palette number 2. It's actually quite interesting. Haven't experimented with these so far. What I thought that I would achieve here is it's completely different. I'm surprised by some of these paints. Okay, and I'm going to move on to my third palette. So same again. So back to palette number 1 again. So this time I'm going to put in the distant mountains here. So again, it's you're basically mixing your 3 primaries together here. So your blue, with a bit of yellow and a wee bit of red. And what that does is when you mix those 3 primaries together, it basically neutralizes each other. There's one. And then palette number 2. Okay, and I'm on to palette number 3 now. Okay, so the next bit here is we're going to tackle the kind of grass banks here, okay? So bear with, folks. So we're basically getting into our yellow there, and we touch of the blue, and that will turn that into a greeny colour for us. And then we'll just bring that down here. And then we'll add a wee bit more blue into that, just as we're coming down the path there. And as you're getting closer to that foreground, you're putting more pigment into it, more saturated colour. Okay, so I'm going to move on to the next palette. Palette number 2. Okay, now I'm on to palette number 3. Okay, so I'm back to my palette number 1 now. And what I want to do is I'm going to work on the little paths here. So I want them to be like a reddy kind of dirt path. So hopefully this is giving you a bit of an idea of what you can achieve with 3 colours. Okay, so I'm going to move on to my second palette now. On to palette number 3. Okay, so here we are, back to palette number 1. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to concentrate on the trees here. It's going to require those 3 colours mix pretty thickly. So definitely start off with that dark blue there and then put some red into it. And maybe a wee hint of yellow there just to brown it up a bit. Okay, here we go. So okay, so that's palette number 1. Okay, so basically that's our yellows, reds, blues, and then making our greens from those. And so what we're going to do now is we're going to try and make some browns. And when I say browns, I don't mean like the way we did those trees there. I mean sort of like something for that would do for rocks and stuff. So this time I'm starting off with yellow and I'm going into a little bit of red this time. And then I'm throwing in a bit of blue. It's just a case of playing around with the ratio there till you get something that looks brown. And that'll do for any kind of rocks and so on that we've got knocking around there. Maybe there's a rock behind here. And then what I'll do is I'll get a wee tissue and just touch the tops of those little stones as if the light's hitting them. So that was palette number 1. Now we're on to palette number 2. And then just touch the tops of those there, just to, as if the light's just hitting the tops. And then on the palette number 3. Okay, so what we need to do now is a little bit of shadow. I would have normally have used maybe cobalt blue and alizarin crimson, but obviously, as this is the 3-color pigment sort of experiment here, I'm going to have to restrict myself. So, starting off with the blue, and then a wee touch of red into that. So what I'm after here is a bit of a purpley colour, and then just where those trees would be there. And then there could be maybe a tree, a shadow coming across the path there. Okay, and now palette number 2. Palette number 3. Okay, so I'm just looking at these paintings now, and I'm just thinking about my next colour. I think what I'll do is I'll maybe put a bit of shadow work onto the water here. So I think I'll just go into my blue again. Hit that with a touch of yellow. That'll turn it green for me. And then on the palette number 2, same again. And then we're on to palette number 3. Okay, what I want to do now is a little bit of dry brush work, just to add a wee bit of texture here and there. Right, palette number 2. Now palette number 3. Okay, now a wee bit of wildlife. And then what I want to do is I want to give the impression that there's tracks and so on. So just a wee bit of dry brush work here. Palette number 2. Palette number 3. Okay, so that's our 3 basic paintings. So what I want to do now is I want to try just scratching out, just to see how the paint responds to that. Okay, so what I'm going to do now, I'm just going to sign each one of them the way I would do is if I'm just finishing the painting. And so it's just using the red there and its full vibrancy. So that's that, folks. So all I would do now is get the old eraser there, and anywhere there's old pencil lines, just get rid of them. So what I'm going to do here, I'm just going to carve out a wee boat. It's just interesting to see how the paper and the pigment respond. Okay, so folks, this is the bit that makes it all look a bit better now when we get the the old tape off. So there you go, folks. There's 3 paintings done with 2 expensive paints and 1 inexpensive paint. So before I reveal what is the inexpensive paint, I would like you to just leave a comment down in the box and just to see, just not to give the game away. And what I will do is when I put this painting up, this little demo, if you could comment and let me know which one you think is the inexpensive paint. And then after a few days, what I will do is I will reveal which paint is used in these 3 pictures. So folks, I hope that's helpful, and I hope it will be helpful when you're deciding which paint you feel is the way to go for you, especially as a beginner anyway, or even if you've been painting for a while but your palette looks a bit stale and so on. So have a wee go at that, even with your own paints. And I know I didn't show you my palette there, but it's only 3 paints out of your palette. Have a wee go at that and see what you can do. And after a few days, when I hear back which paint you think is the inexpensive one, I will let you all know. So folks, take care of yourselves, and I'll see you all soon.